Hey everybody, at the Carmel Bach Festival. This is Eric Whitacre here. We were on choir tour. I was in my college choir at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. And we'd been, if memory serves, it was the end of week 1 or 1.5. Anyway, we were exhausted after lots of traveling and staying up late nights. And in the choir with me at the time was fellow singer Charles Anthony Silvestri. And I only bring his name up because he's a poet that I've since worked with on a number of pieces, including Sleep and Luxorumque and Leonardo Dreams of His Flying Machine. But he and I and one other person were kind of best friends during that whole trip. And we found ourselves somewhere in Northern California. I really don't know where it is, but God, we may have been close to Carmel. I think more inland. And we stopped for the night at a hostel that was near this lake. And as we were sitting outside in the afternoon, looking over this lake, these clouds came rolling in, kind of like a Steven Spielberg movie. You could see the storm was coming. And as the clouds got about halfway to the lake and started to shadow the little valley that we were in, all of the animals, the crickets, the birds, the frogs that were making noise, just suddenly stopped making sound all at the same time. It's the most extraordinary thing. And you could sort of feel this electricity in there, and then this spectacular thunderbolt. And then the rain came down, and it was this monumentally transcendent experience. I don't know what happened in all of that. To me, I felt like it was imprinted on me in that moment. And then a few months later, we were back in Las Vegas, and I was reading at the time the poetry of Octavio Paz, and I read this poem in English. I read the English translation called "The Broken Water Jar," and it emotionally perfectly matched that moment. And I thought, my God, this is it. This somehow sums up that experience. So I started to set it, and that initial chord. Somehow that chord, it didn't sound like the rain or the cloudburst, but it sounded like the sense of wonder and awe that I felt witnessing that cloudburst. And that's how the piece came to be. I don't know when it was that I woke up and was the cluster guy. I didn't mean to be the cluster guy. For me, each of those chords, like I described with cloudburst, those clustery things, well, there's two parts to it. One is the emotional quality, which is that somehow each of them, depending on the piece, they seem to, each one has a very specific emotional color, and sometimes subtle and layered, so that it might be a little bit melancholy or a little haunted, but also with a hint of optimism, an overtone of optimism, if you will, or hope. And so as I'm writing, I'm not really thinking, oh, I'll make these clusters that expand and contract. And it's more, how can I be as emotionally present and true to the poetry that I'm setting and to the piece itself, just to find it in. And those chords then just seem to organically appear. The other thing about the clusters is that I came to choir music rather late. I was 18 when I joined that college choir in Las Vegas, and I didn't read music before then. I played by ear. I played in a pop band. But singing for the first time in a choir, and especially singing close harmonies. I remember being a bass and singing an A, and somebody singing the B above, and that dissonance or a close second. And even now, hearing that and imagining singing that with somebody else, there's this vibration that happens that I feel it physically, viscerally. It makes me giggle. And the thing is, though, I'm not really a good enough singer. I'm a little better now, but so for instance, Cloudburst, if I was the tenor, to find to just jump into that from nowhere would have been very difficult for me. But I realized early on that actually, if we were all singing a triad, so if I was here, and then all I had to do was move a whole step down, but other people were holding, that I could do. There was this pragmatism to it that I could find myself in the middle of a very complex, shimmery cluster with a relatively easy singing line. And so my aesthetic grew partly from that as well, which is just what is the most elegant, organic way to get a group of singers into the middle of one of these shimmery chords with the least amount of pain possible. So the Requiem was my very first experience with choral music. I didn't join choir immediately. They invited me to do it, and I resisted. I thought that the choir people were a bunch of geeks, and I wasn't having anything to do with that. And a friend of mine insisted that I join because there were a bunch of cute girls in the soprano section. So I joined, and there were. And on that very first day, the conductor said, "Let's open." David Weiler is his name. He's still there at UNLV. He said, "Let's turn to the Kyrie." And I didn't even know what a Kyrie was. I wasn't really raised religiously like that. And so I looked over my shoulder. Okay, I guess we're on page 10 here. And we launched into the Kyrie from the Requiem. You know, and I've used this analogy before, but it was as if, you know what it was? It was like, it was as if suddenly for the first time I heard my true name being spoken. Not Eric Whitacre, but my true name, my deep name. And I was completely overwhelmed by the sound around me and being the counterpoint, being submerged in the middle of this cosmic Swiss watch. And that was it. I left that first rehearsal transformed, utterly transformed. I became the world's biggest choir geek. I couldn't get enough of choral music and Mozart, and then later Mahler, who happened to be next to his scores at the library, and then Mussorgsky, and it just opened this complete world for me of transcendent beauty. Bach took me longer. So I remember, this would have been, I don't know, it must have been in 1982, 1983. I was 12 or 13, and this new computer had come out, the Commodore 64, and I'd learned how to program, and I learned how to program BASIC. I'd been in the computer club at school, and there was a commercial for it that used the Bach Invention 13. And not knowing anything about classical music or anything, I distinctly remember hearing that and having this kind of electric feeling in my mind. And it was only later on that when we first performed, that I performed and then later conducted the St. John Passion, that I fell into the well that is Bach. And for me now, there is no composer like Bach. None. My theory is that Bach somehow utilizes lots of parts of the brain at the same time. That there is this rational, reasoned, pattern-seeking part of the brain that is working and taking the journey. And then there's this other emotional part of the brain that the two of them trying to listen and trying to follow and trying to understand creates this cloud of electricity. I'm not sure if Bach is my favorite composer, but if I had to pick one composer to take to a desert island, it would be Bach. Also just because there's so much of it. Yes, I have been to Carmel a couple of times. I adore it. It's beautiful there. One of my very most cherished memories was being there with Charles Anthony Silvestri, the poet that I talked about, and his wife, Julie, and my wife, and we were all very close friends at the time. Julie died of ovarian cancer, 11 years ago now, nearly to the day that I'm recording this in May. And so Carmel holds for me, it's a real place of poetry and joy and light. I wish I could be there for the performance. Anyway, thank you for performing the piece, and best of luck to all of you. And I do hope I get to experience it live sometime. Thank you all so much.